He thought it was just another ordinary evening in his mansion. Wealth, silence, and control. But behind those walls, suspicion grew. A billionaire, certain that trust could never exist across class or color, decided to set a trap. He closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, while a young black maid's child entered the room. What happened in those next moments would shake him to his core, challenging everything he believed about dignity, innocence, and humanity, because sometimes the smallest actions reveal the greatest truths. And when he finally opened his eyes, what he saw left him frozen. Edward Hale was a man who had everything: mansions that stretched like castles, cars lined up like trophies, and money that seemed endless. Yet with all his wealth, there was one thing he never truly believed in: people's honesty, especially those who worked under him. Among his staff was Diana, a black maid whose quiet dignity carried her through every day, no matter how heavy the burden. She was efficient, polite, and invisible in the way wealthy households often preferred their workers to be. But Edward's suspicion never rested even with her. Alongside Diana was her daughter, Maya, a child who often followed her mother into the mansion's grand halls. Maya's wide eyes carried both innocence and curiosity. But to Edward, she was only another reminder of the gap between his world and theirs. He wondered, if given the chance, would this child choose honesty, or would temptation reveal something darker? The thought gnawed at him until it became a plan. That night, in his marble-floored bedroom, Edward decided to test her. He left his door slightly open, scattered a few valuables where temptation might strike, and stretched across his bed as though in deep sleep. His breathing slowed, his eyes closed, but his mind was wide awake. What Maya didn't know was that every step she took inside, that room was being silently measured. And in a few short moments, Edward would learn whether his doubts were justified or shattered forever. The mansion was silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Edward lay still, every breath measured as he waited. The dim glow of the chandelier painted his room in golden shadows. On the polished table beside him, a sleek gold watch and a stack of $100 bills sat deliberately out of place, temptation waiting to be tested. Down the corridor, Maya followed her mother with quiet steps. Diana had asked her to bring in a folded blanket, nothing more. For Maya, entering the billionaire's bedroom felt like stepping into another world. She paused at the door, her small frame almost swallowed by the tall wooden frame, her eyes wide at the shimmering luxury before her. She tiptoed inside, clutching the blanket to her chest. Edward's figure loomed on the bed, still as stone, as though lost in deep sleep. Maya's gaze drifted, and there they were, the watch, the bills, gleaming under the soft light. For a child who had grown up with little, the sight was overwhelming. Her mother worked tirelessly, day after day, yet their small apartment was always just enough, never more. A voice inside her whispered, "No one will know." Another voice, gentler, reminded her of her mother's words. "Our dignity is worth more than gold, Maya." She stood frozen between the two, her heartbeat quickening as temptation pulled at her innocence. Outside, Diana called faintly, reminding her daughter not to linger. But Maya remained still. She placed the blanket carefully over the billionaire, her small hands brushing the edge of the bed. Then, instead of reaching for the glittering watch or the crisp bills, she did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny, folded paper, a crayon drawing she had made earlier that day. A house, a sun, two figures holding hands. She placed it gently beside the watch, as though offering a gift to a man she hardly knew. Edward, beneath half-closed lids, saw everything. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with a feeling he couldn't name. This child, whom he had expected to falter, had just done something no amount of wealth could measure. But the night wasn't over. Because in testing Maya, Edward was about to be tested himself, and the real question lingered in the air. Would he have the courage to face the truth her small act revealed? Edward could no longer hold his disguise. The moment Maya's small hand slid the crayon drawing onto his nightstand, something in him cracked open. His eyes fluttered, then fixed on the simple paper, colors uneven, edges bent, yet filled with more sincerity than all the treasures in his vaults. Maya gasped when she realized he was awake. She stepped back quickly, her wide eyes trembling with fear. To her, it must have looked like she had done something wrong, though her only act had been to give. The billionaire rose slowly, his face unreadable, and picked up the drawing with careful hands. For a long moment, silence filled the room. He looked at the childish lines, the house, the sun, the two figures holding hands. It was innocence captured on paper, but to him, it was also a mirror. All his life, Edward had built walls of suspicion, convinced that people only wanted what he owned. Yet here stood a child who, offered gold and money, had chosen to give instead of take. The weight of his doubt pressed down on him like never before. His throat tightened as he turned toward Maya, who stood frozen, ready to be scolded or worse. But no words of anger came. Instead, a single tear slipped down his cheek, something his staff had never seen. He tried to speak, but his voice broke. Why give this to me?" he finally managed. Maya lowered her head and whispered, barely audible, "Because I thought you looked lonely." The words cut deeper than any truth Edward had ever faced. This was not a test of a child. It was a test of his own humanity, and he realized he had been failing it for years. Edward sat on the edge of his bed, the crayon drawing still trembling in his hands. For the first time in years, his wealth, his mansions, his endless possessions, all felt hollow. What mattered now was the simple truth placed before him by a child, who had nothing to give but her heart. Diana stepped into the doorway, worried at the silence. She froze when she saw her employer's eyes glistening with tears. In all her years of service, she had never seen the billionaire look human until now. Edward turned to Maya, his voice low but steady. "You've given me more tonight than all my riches ever have." He paused, looking at Diana, then back at the girl. "I thought I was testing you. But really, it was me who needed to be tested." The room seemed to breathe again. What began as an act of suspicion had ended as a revelation. Maya had not only passed a test, she had shattered the invisible walls of prejudice and mistrust that Edward had built around himself. From that day forward, his mansion changed, not in marble or gold, but in spirit. Where there had been coldness, there was now warmth. Where there had been suspicion, there was trust. And it all began with the courage of a child who chose dignity over desire. But beyond this mansion, the story lingers. How many times are people judged, tested, or doubted simply because of the color of their skin or the place they come from? How many more tests must the innocent endure before humanity finally learns? The billionaire had his answer that night. The question is, have we found ours? Sometimes the purest hearts come from the humblest places, and their light can change even the coldest soul. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and open the eyes.